Good afternoon. I am Harry Poston, co-chairman of the American Statistical Association's Committee for the Filming of Distinguished Statisticians. It is my privilege to welcome both the present audience and future viewers to the 8th Pfizer Colloquium of the Department of Statistics at the University of Connecticut. These colloquia are sponsored by Pfizer Central Research of Groton, Connecticut, and they bring to us the most distinguished scientists in the field of statistics. The distinguished speaker for our 8th Pfizer Colloquium is Dr. Fred Mosteller of Harvard University. And to provide the introduction, I would like to call on my colleague, Dr. Alan Gelfand.
Thanks, Harry. Yes, Dr. Frederick Mosteller is our speaker for the 8th Pfizer Colloquium, and Dr. Mosteller is currently chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management and professor of mathematical statistics in the Harvard University Graduate School of Public Health. He is also professor of mathematical statistics in the Department of Statistics and the Department of Psychology at Harvard University. In addition, he is a faculty member of the John F. Kennedy School of Government and of the Harvard Medical School. While his honors are too numerous to detail, I will mention that he has been selected to the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and that he is an honorary fellow of the Royal Statistical Society. He is also past president of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, the American Statistical Association, and the Institute of Mathematical Statistics. He has received honorary doctorates from the University of Chicago, Carnegie Mellon University, Yale University, and Wesleyan University. He has authored or co-authored more than 200 papers, and he has authored, co-authored, or edited some 45 books. He has served extensively on government committees, commissions, and advisory boards, in addition to giving much time to a wide range of professional associations. He epitomizes the complete statistician, combining both theoretical and applied viewpoints with important contributions in statistics, but also in psychology, medicine, education, law, history, public policy, quality control, and other fields. He has fostered the effort to bring statistical methods to major public interest and policy questions. His review of the Kinsey Report, his part in the National Halothane Study, and his work on the disputed authorship of the Federalist Papers are but a few examples. He has energetically contributed to statistical education by delivering nationally televised courses in probability theory and statistics, through his numerous books and through his efforts at organizing statistical education both at Harvard and nationally and internationally. The Amstat News, in writing about Dr. Mosteller last fall upon his receipt of the prestigious S.S. Wilkes Medal, observed that he has been a remarkable citizen of the nation and of the world, a statistician with deep knowledge who puts that knowledge to important use. I note parenthetically that Dr. Mosteller was a student of Samuel Wilkes at Princeton University. We are honored to have Dr. Mosteller here to speak to us today. The title of his talk is Broadening the Scope of Statistics and Statistical Education. Professor Mosteller.
Thank you, Al. Whenever I hear a nice introduction like that, I'm always reminded of a old New Yorker cartoon in which the master of ceremonies at a large dinner whispers to the man next to him, "The next speaker needs all the introduction he can get." Coming to Storrs to speak reminds me of many happy memories of lengthy summer seminars here at Storrs held in statistics during the first years after I moved to New England. A great many statisticians met here, and I recall visiting here for a week at a time, working furiously on research papers. The atmosphere was most productive. Chester Bliss was one of the moving spirits of these meetings. My talk today deals with broadening the idea of statistics primarily through teaching, though teaching in a variety of different ways and to a variety of populations in three main areas. First, my hope is to broaden statisticians themselves and their activities in the policy world. And second, I want us to improve our classroom teaching. And third, I want us to inform others of our goals and abilities. Statistics has been a most fertile field for the development of new scientific disciplines. The first president of the first American Economic Society was a member of the American Statistical Association. The field of quality control grew partly out of a tradition of statistics, as will be clear from a study of Walter Schuhart's economic control of the quality of manufactured product, and that of Dodge and Romig, and of W. Edwards Deming. The Biometric Society grew out of the American Statistical Association, and the field of operations research is based largely on applied statistics and probability. Each of these organizations developed into a separate society and peeled off from the parent organization. And of course, the Institute of Mathematical Statistics separated as well. This tendency to nurture statisticians and statistics in new areas and then to let them split off and go their own way has created new organizations and new fields, but it does leave statistics with a stodgy image. Instead of carrying the new banners forward, we keep going on with what's left over. Although statistics is a fertile field for growth, we don't retain what we've nurtured, and this leaves us seeming to be considerably narrower than we ought to be. It also leaves us with less participation in larger affairs where statistics matters a great deal. Don Marquand, president of the American Statistical Association in 1986, has been concerned with our visibility and gravity as well. One reason for our isolation from the seats of power seems to be our training. We're heavily trained as technicians, and as I've remarked elsewhere, I think of myself as a technician and take some pride in that aspect of my work. I think that being a technician is essential if one's to be a scientist, practitioner, or a professional of any kind. With technical credentials, one has something to build upon. We technical people like to work long and hard on detailed problems and get concrete, verifiable results, and this gives us a great deal of satisfaction. Because we spend so much of our time in technical training, and goodness knows there's really no end to that, we have little time or energy left for policy matters. And consequently, we tend not to be brought in when policy matters are discussed. This lack of participation occurs partly because our work does not attract attention directly in policy areas, and partly because people in other areas have already preempted our strength. For example, economists seem to find time to consider policy matters while we do not. Of course, it can be argued that they treat large problems and that their interest in policy fits their profession and not ours. Marquardt argues that because dealing with statistics as numbers seems to be part of nearly everyone's work, we are seen as special problem solvers instead of as prime movers. We could, of course, just be temperamentally opposed to engaging in policy. In the course of our training, I have the impression that we developed the idea that there is something wrong with politics and that politics is separate from something we call science and technology. Yet today, very few of us believe in value-free science or technology. A few people think that science or analysis can deliver truth and that then that truth settles matters. They wouldn't dirty the truth with political conflict. But this simplistic thinking is encouraged in both undergraduate and graduate education, unfortunately, of technical people. And so we do not build ourselves a suitable mental and professional framework for appreciating our possible contributions to policy making. We often may also have the impression that once one knows the truth, then policy follows instantly from that knowledge, and that any deviation from that plan is mulishness or venality on the part of the policy makers. Frequently, I have occasion to read doctoral dissertations in which some important problem, like the disposition of hazardous waste, is analyzed at some length, say hundreds of pages. And at the end of a 400-page work giving quantitative information about the disposition and dangers of the waste, there may be a 2 or 3 page set of recommendations for solving the general problem. My friend Graham Allison, who's dean of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and a canny political analyst, tells me that he likes to see these technical works done in support of policy work, but he also sees that after a 400-page scientific analysis of a technical problem like the hazardous waste one, you may well need another 400 pages just to outline the many policy options and to consider whether further studies may be needed to solve the problems they raise. Key questions include: what are the possible options? Who are the constituencies? Who are concerned about the actions to be taken? What would be the immediate effects? What would be the downstream effects? How do possible policies fit into the fabric of the society for which the original study was done? And what are the costs, risks, and benefits of various possible actions? To explore and exposit such matters requires us to do the same careful work on the policy side that we do on the more technical side. And of course, these matters ripple. For example, suppose that we decide to punish drivers who violate traffic laws by taking away their licenses. Our intent is to gradually remove these dangerous drivers from the road. It probably will temper one's assurance about this step to know that about half the people whose licenses are revoked just continue to drive. Or to take another example, because of the carnage wrought by handguns, we may pass a law that requires a mandatory prison sentence of 1 year merely for possession of an unlicensed gun. Now, time passes, and although lots of people seem to have been caught with unlicensed handguns in their possession, practically nobody is serving a 1-year sentence for this offense. Why not? Well, it's one thing to pass a law and another to implement it. Conviction is required before offenders can be incarcerated, and judges and the legal system have lots of ways to avoid imposing penalties that they don't think appropriate. Judges want to have control of the courts, and the police and prosecution want to handle their cases in their own way. And so it's difficult for the public to impose an automatic law with a penalty, however reasonable it might seem. Once in a while, judges are chided for their failure to impose the law, but not often. You'll note that for these examples, this additional information would have to be part of the policy analysis, if we had one, and indeed must be part of the ultimate policy analysis for action that follows an original technical analysis. Still, we haven't been trained to follow through in this manner. Most of us haven't been taught that policy problems have political issues and that these have to be taken into account in the solution of the problems. Many of us are still acting as if simple truths divorced from the political reality solve social problems. They help, but they're not the whole story. Scientists who want to have their work be objective and true, separate from the political context, want to follow what once was the motto of the Royal Statistical Society, whose English translation is, "Let others thresh it out." And that's why their necktie has as its emblem a sheaf of wheat. And I have one of these neckties on right now, and they'll take a picture of it that you probably can't see. Now, the idea was that statisticians would get the proper data, and then others would decide what to do in the light of the information. I believe that the British later figured out that when others thresh it out, the results may not be so satisfactory, because people who don't know what the numbers mean and don't mean may not be able to use them as well as those who do. Mortimer Spiegelman used to warn that when those who are unfamiliar with data try to make inferences from them, their inferences are usually either too strong, or much too strong, or much too weak. Those who gather and analyze data still have much to offer when policy time comes, and therefore they should be playing a role. David Cordray of the General Accounting Office says that if we want our statistical studies to be more useful to policymakers, then our studies should attend directly to the political aspects of the work. Policymakers will pay more attention to material that attends to the political issues along with the facts than merely to good, strong quantitative studies. What have we statisticians done or can we do to strengthen our position in the policy arena? Now, I mustn't fall into the same trap that Allison was talking about when he warned against instant policy. But I do perceive, you'll never guess it, I really do, I perceive some modest steps that could be taken in the educational arena, and I offer some preparatory efforts. First, it would be well to have a policy course taught in the regular curriculum for graduate students in statistics, and it would be well for these students to have had a course in economics. I speak of one course because it's not so clear how it will help, and we need to get started by trying something out. I assume that if a statistical student wanted to have a track leading to a joint doctorate in policy analysis and statistics, that most statistics departments would be flexible enough to facilitate that. But that requires a student to know and to be committed to the policy area. My concern is to provide some policy education in this area to students as they come along, and not to depend on them picking up an interest serendipitously. 3 organizations could rather naturally be involved in such methods of broadening the horizons of statisticians. First, the American Statistical Association has a section on the teaching of statistics. In the main, it has emphasized improving the teaching of statistics at college and secondary levels, but primarily teaching statistical topics that the profession has already agreed should be taught. I don't think they've considered a role as a facilitator of change in professional attitude toward anything but teaching, though they could, and they're well situated to make new developments and communicate them to the profession. Second, the Social Science Research Council has had a major role in improving education in a variety of fields. For examples, it's successfully met a long-term program to improve the mathematical training of social scientists, and similarly, it's helped to introduce social science methods into the law. It could readily mount a task force to help introduce policy to the statistical community, not as an unusual event, not only to make statisticians technical problem solvers, but as part of the mainstream of policy workers. The SSRC has a long tradition of work by interdisciplinary committees that develop new fields through sustained efforts. Third, the Committee on National Statistics of the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, regularly tackles statistical problems that emerge from policy questions. And it is very well placed to consider the kinds of questions that need treating and to reflect on how our role in policy could be strengthened. The stream of statistical problems being treated by that committee is quite impressive. A recent agenda for a meeting included, among other items, these: the decennial census methodology, supply and demand for teachers, occupational safety and health, statistics for an aging population, quality control of family assistance programs, the future of meta-analysis, fertility statistics, evidence in the courts, income and poverty statistics. The Committee on National Statistics could also consider the larger question of how to make statisticians more effective in policy affairs. I see the matter as interdisciplinary, and I think that the statisticians need to join some political analysts to form a unit, possibly an SSR committee, to develop this program. I doubt if we statisticians could mount this program ourselves, because we have so few people with governmental policy experience, as opposed to technical experience, as problem solvers. Although we do solve technical problems, we don't seem to be engaging in policy even in major statistical matters. For example, the government has hundreds of statistical series that it keeps, and from time to time we add a series or eliminate one. Yet, as far as I know, we have no general structure to help us consider the consequences of any change in series. We're not even very good at measuring the value of information contained in one series. Because much federal money is distributed as a result of the 10-year census, it's often suggested that a 5-year census would be a good idea. We would need to figure out what the added value of the 5-year census would be and see if a profit could be made. This is a difficult problem, an engaging one, and one that may not have a satisfactory solution. It's a political problem because business and industry, planners and developments, have a use for this extra census information, and if they can get society to pay for it, they will make a profit. But will society make a profit? Bruce Spencer and I.R. Savage have thought a bit about problems like this, but most of us haven't thought about it a bit. Now, if you take this particular problem as the issue I'm discussing, you'll miss my main point, because you then see the statistician as a special problem solver again. Instead, what we want to develop is statisticians who play major roles in the policy making about information. If we do want to work on the technical problems, that's all right. But equally, we should be involved in the creation of a national statistical system, which does not now exist, to support our national policies, and this means being involved in the policy making. Let me give an example of a statistical activity that we've long needed to have carried out. We need to find out how statistics are used in the governmental process. Otherwise, how can we make policy toward information? Once years ago, the Committee on National Statistics was almost geared up to consider this question. They were going to review legislation. In the end, the project died, perhaps because of lack of funds or sponsors. Now, the Federal Users Association do have some view of how they use statistics, but they're mainly non-governmental people. When I served on the President's Commission on Federal Statistics, we tried to get information both from statisticians in the government and from various agencies about how and what statistics are used. The statisticians were good at telling us their statistical concerns, and those were helpful. But no one was good at telling us how they use statistics. Indeed, they mostly told us how they didn't use statistics. For example, one agency loftily told us that no one series determined any decisions for them. They gave us a laundry list of 100 series that should be improved by making them more reliable or timely. At the same time, it was hard for the Commission to be convinced that any of these were worth improving if no one at the agency paid attention to any of them. Am I saying statistics aren't of much use? No, of course not. I'm saying that we do not have solid evidence of how our government uses statistics in a documented way. When I say government, I mean to include the executive branch and the agencies, because these are said to use statistics to guide their behavior. Perhaps the legislature uses statistics to show what is needed and how much of what would help it with a social problem. It also uses statistics to distribute money and to trigger certain processes when series signal their need, such as when unemployment passes a certain level and certain actions are sometimes taken. The courts use statistical information in various ways, especially in regulation, as do the regulatory agencies such as FDA. There we have a clear picture of how statistics are sometimes used because the decisions are more nearly stop and go. Less clearly, we have the decisions by the Healthcare Financing Administration on coverage for medical procedures in Medicare. And there, too, statistics are clearly used. In the field of labor, we have some solid information because we use the statistics to tell about employment and unemployment and how they're distributed. But how about the action? Here, we're very weak. In the Census Bureau, we know a lot about the use of statistics to distribute congressional seats and money for various programs, so we do know some specific uses. The area of legislation needs a lot of attention. In the executive, we need to know how OMB uses statistics to influence the budget and how executive agencies use statistics in their daily work. These all need attention. Where do all the statistics gathered for education lead us? How are they used? Some years ago, Phil Hauser wrote a book, Social Statistics in Use, on the various kinds of government statistics and what they are meant to tell us. That was a useful contribution. But now I'd like to see how the statistics are actually used, not what they can tell us. It would not be an impossible project to find out a good deal about this with the help of modest resources spread over a few years. Why would one want to carry out such a study? Well, on the one hand, we have the steady complaint from the legislature and the executive branches that they don't have the statistics they need when they need them. On the other hand, when we statisticians evaluate the situation, we feel that we should worry about the quality of the statistics, their error structure, and the frequency with which they're supplied. But maybe statistics of less quality, supplied less often, of the right kind at the right time would be what is needed. Whatever the truth, if we don't know what the statistics are that decision makers need or how they are used, how can we know what quality they should have and how often they should be delivered? And more centrally, what series a system should contain, what databases should be available. We need to design and execute a sequence of studies, and to do this would require strong statistical guidance, help from economists, political scientists, and the cooperation of every kind of specialty group, to name a few: health, agriculture, defense, and commerce. Let me say a word more about training statisticians at the highest level. Continuing education, if you will. Our top governmental statisticians do not have the same opportunities as those in the United Kingdom. Because the United Kingdom has a centralized statistical system, they have more control over where the key statisticians in their bureaucracy work. The result is that these statisticians are rotated through the system so that over a decade they get experience in several areas of government, perhaps commerce, transportation, finance, taxation, agriculture. So through a system of on-the-job education, they become acquainted with the interconnections of statistics and policies in the vast arena that no one can grasp at once. Having a decentralized system, we in the USA do not have anyone guiding the musical chair education of our top statisticians. No doubt much is learned when statisticians are borrowed for special interagency studies, or when they themselves move from one agency to another in search of personal advancement. But these moves may not be an adequate substitute for planned rotation. It is an empirical question and should be part of our broader examination of these problems. Let me turn now from the general problem of graduate and professional statisticians and their role in policy efforts to our role as producers and distributors of information. My first point deals with the step from the data gathering and analysis to its dissemination and the understanding of the results that we have available. Some directions that we have neglected in our teaching include the behavioral. For example, although we have a couple of very attractive books on graphics by Ed Tufte of Yale and William Cleveland of Bell Laboratories, the total effort in the behavioral studies of graphics has been modest. So far, we have learned, for example, that bar charts are better than pie charts for communicating quantitative information connected with categories. I was glad to hear that because I've always hated pie charts. Also, we have some information about what slopes of lines should be used to communicate differences. But the total accomplishment here is very slight, considering the 2 centuries that we've been studying graphs. I find that statisticians have not seriously considered their job as partly one of delivering information in an effective way to the users. And because of this oversight, we've done little in the way of behavioral studies. Indeed, we often do not recognize them when we see them. I wrote a little paper on the eye fitting of straight lines to data because I wanted to see how the results of this common practice worked out and how far it departed from the results you got by more formal methods of fitting. When I present the results, the readers persist in regarding this as having something to do with the teaching of statistics, rather than seeing how people behave when they apply a statistical technique, and thus how the statistical technique performs in practice. I think we're not tuned into the connection between behavioral studies and communicating information, or finding out what is being communicated. We haven't recognized these aspects as part of our job. And our work in graphics is just one example. Indeed, it's an unusual example because it's practically the only statistical area outside of sample surveys where behavioral research is going on. This seems especially valuable now as the ability of computers to provide good graphics readily makes our ability to produce them many times easier than it used to be. It's a pity then if we don't learn how to use graphics effectively. Another major area is that of tables, except for the work of Andrew Ehrenberg, who has a good set of advice based on self-observation, such as use as few digits as needed, preferably 1 or 2, in giving a number. Or put numbers to be compared in a vertical column rather than a horizontal one. Well, these are good advice, but as far as I know, we don't have behavioral research going on how to construct tables so as to deliver information well. Similarly, we do not have advice to give readers of graphs or tables based on behavioral research on how to use their eyes and minds to dig information out of tables and graphs. Well, let me leave the specific area of graphics and tables to take up the more general problem of communication of statistical information and the effectiveness of those communications. And more specifically, I want to mention our own classroom teaching to students who are non-statisticians. Very few groups have studied how to improve collegiate or university teaching in a behavioral way, though it is a common study in secondary and elementary schools. We statisticians do not seem to be among those who are making such studies. President Bach of Harvard University believes that we should develop methods and appraise our educational programs in colleges and universities, and to this end, he has established a seminar at Harvard that meets monthly on ways of evaluating teaching and on what sorts of things are being found. And the membership of this seminar comes from colleges all over New England. I'm a member of this group, and the subgroup that I'm in is considering ways of getting feedback to the teacher. Now, we're all familiar with end-of-the-course evaluations that give the teacher some suggestions about how to improve the course next year. Instead of this, our group is considering methods of helping teachers apply mid-course corrections to a course that's currently being taught. And I'll describe 2 of these ideas. At this seminar, I was stimulated by Dr. Patricia Cross of the Graduate School of Education at Harvard to explore the use of what she calls a minute paper. A minute paper is a device for giving a teacher fast feedback in a course, and it can be used for many purposes, such as to choose examples, to see what optional topics students would prefer to see treated, and to find out what students think they've found out. Dr. Cross quoted a physicist who was cited as somebody who always knew just where his students were in the course. The physicist noted that the reason for this probably was because of his use of these minute papers. He said all he wanted to know at the end of a lecture was what the student thought was the most important point of the lecture and what the student wanted to know more about. And to find out, he stopped the lecture 2 or 3 minutes before the end and asked the students to respond to these 2 questions on the paper. Well, I was teaching a beginning statistics course and was about half into the semester, and I thought I'd try out this idea. I explained President Bach's seminar to the class and asked them these 2 questions every day at the end of the hour, and some signed their papers and some did not. I should mention to you that some years ago, Dr. Elizabeth Allison, who happens to be married to the Graham Allison that we talked about earlier, she's an economist. She carried out a sequence of studies on teaching effectiveness in the Department of Economics at Harvard and found out a big key point, and that is that the lecturer should summarize the main points of the lecture. Now, you might think that anybody would know that, but I recognize that not only didn't I always do that, but that in the scramble of last-minute questions at the close of a lecture, I wasn't likely to either. So as a result of her work, at the beginning of every lecture, I write the key points, usually 3 to 6, on the left-hand blackboard where they sit all through the lecture. Since I began that, students often mention this practice with approval in their end-of-the-course critiques. So now when I tried out this new minute paper trick and the students wrote out their single key point, they could have used one of mine, and no doubt some did. Many formulated the point in their own words, though, and I summarized these and made a frequency distribution of them and handed them back at the next class meeting. It wasn't much trouble and gave us few surprises. I had about 50 students. Now, here are a few of the most important ideas from a lecture on multiple regression. Using more predictor variables improve estimation. There are dangers in collinearity, problems of perfection in relations, how to deal with many attributes, and so on. A straight line may fit better than a fitted quadratic, even when the quadratic is the correct form. Stepwise regression is a practical way to choose a good set, but not the best set of k variables from among many. Well, those are some key points they picked up in some of the lectures. What they wanted more of was how to use computers to apply these methods, more on pros and cons of curvilinear regression, more practical applications, including an example where a line isn't better than a curve, and they want to know how to finish up a stepwise regression. After I tried this minute paper idea out in 4 lectures, I asked the students what they thought of this approach, and they liked it. They said it gave them an opportunity to integrate the lecture right at the end of the hour, and some regarded this as very beneficial. But one student made a pretty perceptive breakthrough. He said essentially, the trouble with this procedure is that you aren't getting any feedback. How could he say this in the midst of this massive feedback I was getting? He said, well, you give us the key points, and the one we give you back are much the same, and so you don't learn much about what we need, and our answers to what we want more of are much too vague in general. Well, he had his finger on what I regarded as the blandness of the results. And so, as a result of this stimulation, I suggested that we might add the question, what was the muddiest point in the lecture? And this was met with acclamation. So we tried it that very day. Well, this question just produces an absolute fountain of specific responses. It leads to very concrete and relevant statements of what students want to know more about. Sometimes they ask for little things like how to carry out a calculation, sometimes for big things such as connections with other parts of the course, or even with the outside world, or on a lucky day, a few students don't even have a muddy point. We used those 3 questions for the rest of the semester except for one day when the class ran overtime. Some examples of the muddiest point from a lecture on the analysis of variance were, how do you calculate degrees of freedom? How do you interpret within mean square versus between mean square? Why do we use the F-test? Why do deviation scores add to 0? Well, I have the impression that the students appreciate the effort, and a few have asked almost with indignation, why haven't we been doing this all along? And the answer is that I didn't have this idea of instant feedback before. I recognized the value of detailed written appraisals given by students at the close of a course to reorganize the course for next time, but I thought of the usual questions and answers during the lecture as handling these instant feedback. Some version of the muddiest point question seems valuable because it promotes concrete and sometimes non-trivial responses to the question of what you want to know more about. Now, some things students want to know more about won't interest the other students. And so, or it may require preparation that some other students don't have. And so, what I do there is to prepare a special handout and distribute them. In all, in the second half of the semester, I prepared 6 handouts that I wouldn't have otherwise prepared, and then I prepared 2 more, that made 8, but I probably would have prepared those 2 in any case. Now, I don't have any idea how this approach would work with less sophisticated and less dedicated students. I think it will work for an instructor who is well armed against criticism. How has my behavior changed? Well, first, it cost me between half and 3/4 of an hour extra to prepare each summary 3 times a week. Probably about 6 minutes of the next lecture was changed from what it would ordinarily have been in an attempt to respond to the queries. And then there was a time taken for writing up the extra handouts, probably an hour and a half each. In addition, we stopped a couple minutes early. All told then, perhaps 15% of the class time was changed, and we don't know who read the handouts. I've also been asked about the changed behavior on the part of the students. Well, they had to write a minute paper, say 3 minutes, and many seemed to use that time to leaf through their notes to consider what to put down. A few who seemed not to have a class in the next period pondered their responses for exasperatingly long periods while I waited, and they seemed very satisfied with what they had written. And those I talked with about it seemed very pleased. I didn't have the impression that anyone prepared a response before coming. Nobody complained to me about lecture time lost. I might say as a general proposition, I've never heard of anybody complaining about a lecture being finished too soon. So I would say roughly that 5%, their 5% effort changed about 15% of my class behavior. And of course, if you believe participation speeds learning, and many people do, it raised the level and maintained it at each session. I would use this muddiest point in the lecture question again. Let me mention some other areas where we can improve our performance and where we can improve the public understanding of statistics. In the area of credibility, we've had few behavioral studies, though a few have been carried out in the neighborhood of the idea of coincidences, and a few in connection with cognition and learning, logic and illogic of learning. We've not tried to find out what makes a study credible to the general public as compared with what makes it credible to a statistician or a scientist who knows the field well. This is an important arena and one that deserves fresh attention. Again, it's an example where a behavioral approach may be more informative than a theoretical one. We need to know how to improve the credibility of our writings for the general public if they're to take advantage properly of the stronger findings that we're able to collect. And then we need to tell statisticians how to use the information. We also need to do more about educating the general public about statistics, and so as a final suggestion, let me suggest a need. Although we've tried to tell the general public about some practical ideas in the field of statistics through such volumes as the book of essays entitled Statistics, A Guide to the Unknown, and a recent book entitled The Fascination of Statistics, I feel that we haven't done enough to educate the general public about statistics as a whole field. What sort of a work do I have in mind? The nearest thing to it right now is Steve Stigler's History of Statistics, The Measurement of Uncertainty Before 1900, published by Harvard University Press. His book is beautifully written, full of historical information not readily found elsewhere, and has original treatment of some important ideas in probability and statistics. On the other hand, the reader has to take a very scholarly interest in statistics to get around the amount of technical material presented. What we need in addition to these efforts for the general public is a well-written book that presents the great ideas in statistics with attractive examples and illustrations and nice anecdotes. We need such a book because we need to teach people about statistics as a broad discipline that affects their minds and lives in ways parallel to those of physics, chemistry, and medicine. What are some of these big ideas? the notion of design of experiments, ideas of uncertainty and their resolution, ideas of inference and decision, processes of sampling and data gathering, and the vast area of data analysis, which would include statistical modeling and simulation. A major purpose here is to broaden the field of statistics in the mind of the public, just as we need to broaden it in the mind of statisticians. Let me summarize this talk. I suggest we need to broaden both our own view of the field of statistics and the missions of statisticians, and the view held by the general public. We can do this through a combination of teaching, research, and exposition. I make 3 points. First, to increase our input in both social and scientific affairs, our own statistical professionals need to understand the role of policy and to participate in its formulation and implementation. I suggest a serious educational development effort for our profession, starting with doctoral students involving the American Statistical Association's Committee on Teaching, the formation of a Social Science Research Council committee, and the cooperation of the Committee on National Statistics. Second, I note that we have not paid enough attention to the effectiveness of statistical communication, and that we ourselves need to use behavioral research to study the usage of information. Using behavioral science research methods, we should be finding out how to make graphs and tables and how to teach people how to read them. This work is going on in graphs, survey research, and marketing, but we need it in other areas. We need to use it to improve our regular classroom teaching. And more grandly, we need to study the national statistical system and learn how it is used by the executive, the legislature, and the courts, so that we can strengthen it and improve its utility. Third, and finally, we need to deliver a more complete image of our field to the general public, and this needs to be done through popular writing, by describing the important ideas statistics offers to our information-using society. Thank you.
It is now time to bring our colloquium to an end, and I can think of no better way than simply to say thank you to Fred for a fine presentation. This concludes our Pfizer colloquium.